Good afternoon, Year 11, and welcome today to your screencast for the Health and the People topic, so the medicine topic. And today we're going to be doing a walkthrough of the Health and the People paper from 2023. So in 2023, and for your exam, you'll get a paper, which is like the one on the left here, and you'll get a sources booklet with source A in. So what I would do straight away is I would open my paper and let's have a look at question 1. So this is a walkthrough just for question 1. So you can see we've got 2 pages to answer question 1 in, and question 1 will ask us the following. Study source A. How useful is source A to a historian studying the cholera epidemics of the 19th century? So straight away I know I need to do 2 things. I need to work out the history of the question, and it's asking me about the cholera epidemics of the 19th century, so the 1800s. And I know it's asking me to look at source A as well. And if it is a source question, I know the structure I need to use is C, suggest, O knowledge. This I can see is 8 marks, so it's going to be giving me 10 minutes to answer the question, and a couple more to kind of look through the source and try and understand it as well. So around 12 minutes on this question, please. What I would then do is get my source and have a look at it. And I know if it's an 8-mark question, I need 2 paragraphs. So I need 2 things that I can see in the source. Now what's important here is I look at all of the source as a whole and not just ignore this. So I am not going to write about this, but I need to read it to make sense of what's going on in the image. So it says, a cartoon drawn in 1852 entitled A Court for King Cholera. The cartoon was published in Punch magazine in 1852. Punch was a popular magazine which often used humour to comment on life in Britain. The cartoon was drawn by a well-known artist, John Leech, who began working for Punch in 1841. So this image is all about cholera, and I would be having to pick out 2 things that I can see about or that I can link with cholera. So first of all, if I look at the back here, I can see a woman here throwing something out of a window. Now I know at the time that they used to throw poo out the window, so that's my first sort of thing that I can pick up on, isn't it? It also tells me here that the cartoon was called A Court for King Cholera. Now, it doesn't say it in the image, and that's probably because at the time it wasn't written very clearly, so they've not photocopied it. But you could definitely talk about how they called it A Court for King Cholera. So, A Court for King Cholera. So I would definitely be talking about that. I could also be talking about the fact that they don't seem to understand disease, the fact that they're all kind of on the floor, rolling around, messing around in dirt, and that could be quite important to it as well. What I don't want you to talk about, because a lot of us struggle on this and get ourselves wrapped up, is the provenance. So don't talk about when it was made, don't talk about who made it or where it was made if you can avoid it. If there's clearer things in the image, talk about that. For example, I've picked out poo. I've picked out that it's called, this image, A Court for King Cholera. So what I would do now is just really briefly, I'm just going to write my answer. So again, I am not going to go into loads of detail and write it out word for word, but what I am going to do is just write down what my answer would sort of look like. So I would going to say, I can see a woman throwing poo out of a window. What does this suggest or show me about cholera? So it shows me how cholera was spread. Again, linking back to the questions. So I would say this is useful when studying cholera epidemics of the 19th century, because it shows me how it was spread. And then what I would do is use my own knowledge about this. Okay, so how cholera is spread. Well, my own knowledge, it has to be really detailed. So I would start off by saying, well, I know Pooh was kept at home. I'd then say, well, why was Pooh kept at home? They'd either sell it to farmers or they would throw it out of windows. I would then go on to say, well, this got into the water supply, so the poo was in the water supply when it was thrown out of windows, and this caused cholera. And it got into the water supply, so I'd expand on that. I'd say it got into the water supply, there was no sewers because of the laissez-faire policy of the government. And obviously it was too late for Bazalgette. So this was before, quite clearly, Bazalgette. So I can mention that, it's before Bazalgette was introduced, before he made sewers. And I could also say the same here, the fact that it's caused cholera, obviously before Jon Snow. So I could just mention that in passing. I don't need to go into detail about it, but I could say that, they don't understand it's before Jon Snow's time, before Jon Snow's found out about the water pump. So if we look here, we can really see the difference. So there'll be about a sentence for the see, there'll be about a sentence for the show or suggest, and the own knowledge is really, really detailed. So that would be my first paragraph. I would then move on to my second paragraph, and it's exactly the same structure. I would be saying, I can see the fact it's called A Court for King Cholera. This suggests to me about, so I would be saying, and I'm going to write this out because again it's probably our biggest weakness in source questions now. This is useful when studying cholera, or if we're going to use the full question, which we probably should do, cholera epidemics of the 19th century. Because it suggests, and I will be focused on the fact that it's called King Cholera, it suggests that cholera was the main disease. Because obviously the king is the main person in society. And then I would go on to look at my own knowledge. What do I have that suggests that cholera was the main disease in terms of my own knowledge? Well, I would be saying it came to England in 1831 and it killed 50,000 people straight away. I would be saying it obviously returned in 1837, and that was when Chadwick did his report, but the government ignored this because of a laissez-faire policy. So it continued to be the king, again, continued to be linking back to the fact it was the main disease. So Chadwick report, it was a laissez-faire, meaning it was still the main disease. Also, in 1848, they introduced the Public Health Act, which failed because it was not compulsory to clean up streets. Again, this meant that cholera wasn't stopped, meaning it was the main disease. So keeping on going back to the fact it's the main disease, I would then go on to say that it continued to be the main disease until 1854 in Jon Snow. So it was continued to the main disease because people thought it was miasma or even spontaneous generation. Now remember, you guys have in this answer 12 minutes altogether, 2 to kind of analyse the source and 10 to write. So it might not be possible to write all that. If you're a fast writer, it definitely is. But again, look here at the structure. 1 sentence for see, 1 sentence for suggest, and then your own knowledge, the amount of own knowledge we use, there's a lot there, isn't there? And if you can see, we keep linking back to this idea, it's the main disease, it's the king disease. So keep linking back to it. And I'll show you this link here, okay? Again, we're saying poo thrown out of the window. How it spread, right, well, hang on. Well, it spread because it was being thrown out of the windows because it was being kept at home. It spread because it's in the water supply, but why is the water supply being able to be infiltrated? Because there's no sewers, that's why it's spread. It's because they've got a laissez-faire policy, that's why it's spread. So again, linking back to your suggestion. And that is how you write a really good source answer, sorry.